A monastery in Switzerland, 816 AD. Monks draft the most detailed garden plan medieval Europe will ever produce. The St. Gall plan shows 18 raised beds, each dedicated to specific crops, precise measurements, exact plant spacing, a complete food production system designed to feed a community through every season, including winter. That plan survives today. We can read exactly what they grew, where they planted it, and how the pieces fit together. Charlemagne's Capitulary de Villiers from 812 AD lists 73 plants required on royal estates. Medieval peasant gardens, documented in manorial records, followed similar patterns on smaller scales. These weren't random vegetable patches. They were engineered systems producing food 12 months a year without grocery stores, refrigeration, or synthetic inputs. A modern family of 4 spends roughly $9,000 annually on groceries. Medieval peasant families spent nothing on vegetables because their gardens produced year-round. The techniques that made this possible still work. The plants still exist. The knowledge of how to combine them into a functioning system is what disappeared. Here's how to build that system today. If you find value in recovering this knowledge, consider subscribing. Every week this channel digs up agricultural wisdom that modern industry buried. And if there's a specific medieval technique you want investigated, drop it in the comments. The foundation, design principles that lasted 8th century. Medieval gardens weren't designed for summer abundance and winter emptiness. They were designed for continuous harvest. The St. Gall plan dedicates equal attention to storage crops as fresh eating crops. Peasant cottage gardens, documented in English manorial surveys, show the same pattern. Onions, leeks, and root vegetables gen as much space as summer greens. The first principle is perennial backbone. Medieval gardens anchored production with plants that returned year after year. Good King Henry, mentioned in monastery records, produced asparagus-like shoots in early spring when nothing else grew. Sorrel provided fresh greens from March through November. Welsh onions, planted once, divided and spread forever. These perennials required no annual replanting, no seed saving, no starting from scratch each spring. They simply produced. The second principle is succession planting. Medieval gardeners didn't plant everything in May and hope for the best. They planted in waves. Early spring crops like peas and fava beans went in as soon as ground thawed. As those finished, summer crops replaced them in the same beds. Late plantings of turnips and winter greens followed the summer harvest. The same square footage produced 3 crops instead of 1. The third principle is storage integration. Medieval households grew food specifically for winter eating, not as an afterthought but as primary design consideration. Onions that cure and store for 8 months. Parsnips that improve after frost and hold in ground until March. Cabbage varieties that form dense heads lasting through winter in root cellars. Every medieval garden allocated significant space to crops that fed families when nothing else grew. Modern vegetable gardening ignores all 3 principles. We plant tomatoes and zucchini, harvest for 2 months, then buy groceries until next summer. Medieval households couldn't afford that gap. Their gardens didn't allow it. Layer 1. The perennial backbone. Medieval monastery records consistently mention the same perennial vegetables. These plants anchored food production because they required minimal labor while producing maximum reliability. Plant once, harvest for decades. Good King Henry appears in records from the 1500s under names like Lincolnshire spinach and all good. Archaeological evidence shows it growing near abandoned medieval settlements centuries after people left. This plant produces asparagus-like shoots in early spring, exactly when stored winter vegetables run low and nothing else is ready. Leaves follow, usable like spinach through summer. The same plant feeds you from April through September, returning every year without replanting. Sorrel shows up in medieval monastery plant lists and peasant garden documentation. French sorrel in particular produces harvestable leaves from early spring through late fall, a 7-month harvest window from a single perennial. The tangy, lemony flavor substituted for citrus in medieval cooking. One planting provides decades of production. Welsh onions, sometimes called everlasting onions in old texts, appear in Charlemagne's required plant list. Unlike bulbing onions that must be replanted annually, Welsh onions form clumps that divide and spread. Harvest green tops year-round. Divide clumps every few years to propagate. Medieval households maintained Welsh onion patches for generations. Sea kale appears in coastal monastery records as a cultivated vegetable. Young shoots, blanched by mounding soil or covering with pots, taste similar to asparagus. The same crowns produce for 20 years or more. Wild populations still grow along European coasts where medieval monks harvested them. Rhubarb, though more commonly documented in later medieval periods, follows the same pattern. Plant crowns once, harvest stalks for decades. Medieval households used it primarily for medicinal purposes, but the cultivation principle demonstrates perennial thinking. A modern garden built on these 5 perennials produces fresh food from early April through late October without replanting a single seed. That's the backbone. Annual crops fill gaps and add variety, but perennials provide security. Layer 2. Annual rotation. Medieval crop rotations weren't just about soil fertility. They were about continuous harvest. The 3-field system applied to large-scale farming, but cottage gardens used similar sequencing principles on small plots. Every bed produced multiple crops per season. Spring plantings went in as early as soil could be worked. Peas tolerate frost and produce in 60 to 70 days. Fava beans handle cold and mature in 90 days. Medieval records show these crops planted in March for May and June harvest. As pea vines finished, gardeners pulled them and planted summer crops in the same space. Summer crops occupied beds from June through September. Cabbages, planted as starts in early summer, formed heads by fall. Beets, sown in early summer, matured before frost. Beans for drying went in after soil warmed, producing crops that stored through winter. The St. Gall plan shows distinct areas for these warm-season vegetables. Late plantings extended harvest into winter. Turnips sown in July or August mature in 60 days and hold in ground through freezing weather. Kale planted in late summer survives frost and tastes better after cold exposure. Leeks, started in spring but harvested in fall and winter, bridge the gap between summer abundance and true winter storage crops. The critical insight: medieval gardeners treated beds as time slots, not permanent assignments. A bed might grow peas from March to June, beans from June to September, then turnips from September through winter. 3 crops from one bed in 1 year. Modern gardening typically produces 1 crop per bed per year. Medieval gardening tripled that productivity through sequencing. Layer 3. Storage crops. Here's where medieval gardens differ most dramatically from modern vegetable patches. Medieval households allocated roughly half their garden space to crops grown specifically for winter storage. Not freezing, not canning, just crops that naturally hold for months. Onions appear in virtually every medieval garden record. Not scallions for fresh eating, but storage onions bred to cure and last. Charlemagne's Capitularia lists multiple onion varieties. Properly cured storage onions hold 6 to 8 months in cool, dry conditions. A medieval family might grow 200 onions, enough for one every day through winter and spring. Garlic follows similar patterns. Plant in fall, harvest in summer, cure properly, and garlic stores until the following spring. Medieval recipes assume garlic availability year-round because gardens provided it year-round. Root cellars made parsnips, carrots, beets, and turnips available through winter. But medieval gardeners also used the ground itself as storage. Parsnips left in the garden improve after frost as starches convert to sugars. Mulched heavily, they hold in ground through winter and provide fresh harvests in early spring when nothing else is growing. Turnips handle similar treatment in milder climates. Cabbage varieties bred for storage produce dense heads that last months in cold conditions. Medieval records document specific storage cabbages, distinct from tender summer varieties. A root cellar stocked with 50 cabbages provided weekly meals from November through February. Dried beans and peas required no cold storage at all. Fully mature pods harvested in late summer produced beans that stored indefinitely at room temperature. Medieval peasant households depended on dried legumes for winter protein. The same varieties grow today. The mathematics of medieval storage gardening. 50 square feet of onions produces enough for daily use through winter. 100 square feet of storage potatoes provides staple carbohydrate for a family. 50 feet of dried beans supplies protein for months. Medieval families worked these calculations because survival depended on them. The integration. How it all works together. A modern medieval garden for a family of 4 requires roughly 1,000 square feet, about the size of a small backyard. Less if you're efficient, more if you want abundance. Medieval cottage gardens ranged from 500 to 2,000 square feet, depending on family size and available land. Here's how medieval design principles translate to modern plots. Dedicate 200 square feet to perennials. 1 bed for Good King Henry and sorrel. 1 bed for Welsh onions and chives. 1 area for asparagus if space allows. These beds produce year after year with minimal attention. They anchor your food security. Allocate 400 square feet to succession-planted annuals. Divide into 4 beds of 100 square feet each. Rotate crops through beds seasonally. Bed 1 gets peas in March, beans in June, kale in August. Bed 2 gets favas in March, beets in June, turnips in August. Keep every bed producing from spring through fall. Reserve 400 square feet for storage crops. 100 feet of onions planted as sets in early spring. 100 feet of potatoes planted mid-spring. 100 feet of carrots and parsnips planted in late spring for fall harvest. 100 feet for garlic planted in fall, and winter squash planted in early summer. If this information is useful, a quick like helps the algorithm show it to more people looking for these answers. The remaining space goes to paths, compost, and flexibility. Medieval gardens weren't rigid. Gardeners adjusted based on what succeeded and what failed. Build in room for experimentation. The critical shift from modern gardening. Stop thinking in terms of summer vegetables. Start thinking in terms of 12-month food production. Medieval households didn't garden as a hobby that produced tomatoes in August. They gardened as a food system that eliminated grocery dependency entirely. The seasonal calendar. Medieval agricultural records provide planting calendars that still work today. Adjust dates for your climate, but the sequence remains valid. March, plant peas, fava beans, and onion sets as soon as soil can be worked. Start cabbage and leek seeds indoors, if not purchasing starts. Harvest overwintered parsnips and the first spring shoots from perennial beds. April, continue succession planting peas every 2 weeks for extended harvest. Transplant cabbage starts. Plant potatoes when soil reaches 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Begin harvesting Good King Henry shoots and sorrel leaves. May, after last frost, plant beans for drying. Summer squash and winter squash. Sow beets and carrots for storage. Set out late cabbage transplants. Harvest spring peas. June, harvest fava beans and early peas. Plant beans in beds where peas finished. Sow turnips and rutabagas for fall. Continue harvesting perennial greens. July, harvest early potatoes. Plant late beans. Sow kale, collards, and late turnips. Begin harvesting onions when tops fall over. August, cure and store onions. Harvest beans for drying. Plant garlic for next year. Sow cold hardy greens for fall and winter harvest. September, harvest storage potatoes, carrots, beets, and winter squash. Process beans for dry storage. Begin harvesting late cabbages and root vegetables. October, continue root harvest. Mulch parsnips for winter ground storage. Harvest late greens that improve after frost. Clean and prepare beds for spring. November through February, eat from storage. Harvest kale, leeks, and parsnips as needed from the garden. Plan next year's rotation. This calendar produces food every month. Not just summer abundance, but year-round sustenance. Medieval households followed similar schedules because they had no alternative. Modern households can follow them by choice. The economics: a family of 4 spending $9,000 annually on groceries allocates roughly half that to produce, roughly $4,500. A 1,000 square foot garden following medieval principles produces the vegetable equivalent for about $200 in seeds, starts, and soil amendments. The first year requires more investment. Perennial crowns cost more than seeds but produce for decades. Building beds and improving soil takes labor and materials. Budget $500 to $800 for initial setup. From year 2 forward, costs drop dramatically. Seeds from saved plants cost nothing. Perennials return without replanting. Compost from kitchen scraps and garden waste replaces purchased amendments. Annual maintenance costs fall below $100 for a garden producing thousands of dollars worth of food. Medieval peasants understood this mathematics intuitively. Time invested in garden establishment paid returns for decades. The modern mistake is viewing garden setup as annual expense rather than long-term investment. Medieval design assumes permanence. What they knew: medieval households fed themselves year-round from plots smaller than modern backyards. Not through superior technology, but through system design. Perennials provided security. Succession planting maximized productivity. Storage crops eliminated winter dependency on outside food sources. Industrial agriculture convinced us that food comes from stores. Medieval reality demonstrated that food comes from gardens designed to produce it continuously. The techniques haven't changed. The plants haven't changed. Only our collective memory of how to combine them into functioning systems disappeared. 1,000 square feet. The right plants in the right sequence. Storage varieties alongside fresh eating varieties. Perennials anchoring production while annuals fill seasonal gaps. This is the medieval garden that fed families for 800 years. The knowledge isn't lost. It's buried under assumptions that food requires grocery stores and vegetable gardens only produce in summer. Those assumptions serve industries that profit from dependency. They never served the families who needed to eat. Build the system medieval households perfected. Design for 12 months instead of 3. Plant for storage instead of just fresh eating. Anchor production with perennials that return without replanting. The garden that fed families through medieval winters can feed your family through modern ones. Same plants, same techniques, same results. 8 centuries of proven success, available to anyone willing to dig up what industrial agriculture buried.